following is a feature presentation of the Replay Sports Channel, the home for great games.
Welcome to WFL Inside Access. I'm your host, Glenn Walker. This episode is brought to you by Royal Retros, your ultimate one-stop shop representing the teams of the past. Head over to Royal Retros today and use the discount code REPLAY to receive 10% off your purchase. The link will be provided in the show description. Week 4 was the official start of division play and bye weeks. 4 teams, Cleveland, New Jersey, San Antonio, and San Diego, got the week off to rest and regroup. We're starting to see some teams break from the pack in their respective divisions. New Jersey and Philadelphia in the east, Chicago and St. Louis in the north, Birmingham in the south, and Arizona, Las Vegas, and San Diego in the west. The Inside Access crew will give you the rundown from all of the Week 4 games and what you need to know as we head into Week 5.
Week 4 of the WFL is officially done.
Yeah.
And, well, this was the week the entire league got a reality check.
It really was.
We had bye weeks for Cleveland, New York, San Antonio, and San Diego, which meant division rivals were squaring off for the very first time.
Yeah.
And suddenly, the standings aren't just a curiosity anymore. They're starting to define who these teams actually are.
Exactly. The sources we looked at for this deep dive, they all confirmed that the narrative of who you are is now, well, it's baked in.
Right.
The teams that are built for the long haul, the ones who can handle adversity and pressure, they're separating themselves from the pack.
And on the flip side, those 0-4 teams.
Oh.
It's not just bad luck anymore.
No, their weaknesses are proving to be tactical. They're repeatable.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah.
This feels like a real pivot point in the season. Our mission here is to cut through that mountain of stats from this week and isolate the key trends.
For sure.
We need to know who the undisputed early division leaders are. Which players delivered these, truly unprecedented statistical masterpieces.
And maybe most importantly,
What's the winning strategy right now? Is it that brute force, that defensive dominance, or is it the surgical precision of an offensive air raid?
we saw a perfect stylistic split this week. The East is currently defined by grit. You've got New Jersey and Philadelphia breaking away.
And the North and South.
Pure offense.
Yeah.
Chicago and St. Louis are surging up north. Birmingham is dominating the South. And then out west, you've got the silent killers. Arizona and Las Vegas just maintaining perfection.
Let's start right there with that defensive dominance.
Right.
The Eastern grind. Philadelphia and D.C. 13-3. That low score just screams defensive struggle. But what really stands out to me in the reports is that Philly still won, despite turning the ball over 4 times themselves.
Right.
How is that even possible?
That's the core of the East's defensive story right now. Philly won because their defense didn't just stop D.C., they physically punished them.
Punish them.
The analysis suggests D.C.'s offensive scheme simply could not protect C.J. Stroud. He was under relentless duress, and the result was a catastrophic 7 sacks and 3 interceptions.
7 sacks. That's more than a defensive success. That's a comprehensive failure by the offensive line.
It is. And it wasn't just a statistical win for Philly. It was physically costly for D.C. The reports focused heavily on major injuries. Aiden Hutchinson, Owusu Koromoa, Brandon Ayuk.
All forced out.
All forced out due to that constant pounding. That's a defense taking a toll that will last for weeks. Philly held D.C. without a single touchdown. They dominated yardage almost 2-1, and they owned the time of possession.
So when your defense is that punitive, you can afford a few offensive mistakes.
You can afford 4 of them, apparently.
But even in that defensive slugfest, There was one singular offensive difference maker. Philadelphia's MVP, Jaden Reed.
Oh, he was incredible.
He accounted for a staggering 264 total yards, 174 receiving, 90 rushing, and the game's only touchdown. He basically carried that offense when the defense gave him a chance.
He was the exception to the grind, for sure. Now, contrast that tight, low-scoring game with the New Jersey Hitmen's 35-7 blowout of Baltimore.
Which, on the surface, looks like an offensive explosion.
It does, but the sources remind us that the closing power of the Hitmen, it was purely defensive.
Well, their offense looked surgical. Justin Herbert threw 3 scores, 2 of them to Adam Thielen. The MVP was Joe Mixon, 3 touchdowns, 185 total yards.
And they converted every single red zone trip. 3 for 3, that's a machine.
Peak efficiency.
But here's the key point that ties the East together. Even with 35 points on the board, Patrick Surtain II delivered the real closing statement. His 34-yard pick six in the fourth quarter officially sealed it.
A defensive touchdown.
It signals that New Jersey's identity is built on takeaways. Even when the offense is firing on all cylinders, the defense delivers that psychological knockout punch.
But hang on, that's a fair challenge, right? Doesn't a defensive score in a 35-7 blowout actually, take away from the whole defensive struggle narrative of the East? It sounds like offensive control to me.
That's a great point, but I would argue it solidifies the mentality of the East. Whether they win 13-3 or 35-7, the teams that are separating themselves, Philly and New Jersey, they rely on turning opponent mistakes into points.
Or stopping them completely.
Exactly. They don't just win, they break the opposition, often violently. And that is the definition of defensive dominance.
Okay. If the East is smash-mouth defense, then the North and South were just unrestricted aerial assaults. Let's talk about yardage. Birmingham's 34-17 win over Tampa Bay was a fireworks show.
It was, and it was all driven by Bo Nix.
Nix was phenomenal, 389 yards through the air, and he accounted for 4 total touchdowns, running 1 in himself.
And what's fascinating is how seamlessly they moved the ball. Birmingham converted 7 of 13 third downs. They scored on 4 of 5 red zone trips. That's just precision.
And that precision was delivered by one of the most effective receiving duos we've seen all year. Justin Jefferson, 151 yards. Jamar Chase, 149 yards.
They combined for over 300 yards against a single secondary. I mean, what do you even do as a defensive coordinator? It's an impossible choice.
It is. But the truly mind-bending stat from that game belongs to Tampa Bay's Cooper Kupp. You just cannot ignore this number.
14 catches.
For 213 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was the receiving player of the week in a loss.
It's statistically absurd.
It is. Did the source material offer any insight into the coaching strategy there? How do you let one player dominate like that while the rest of the team just fails?
The report strongly suggested that Tampa Bay's whole scheme was just let Cooper Kupp win his one-on-one matchups.
And hope for the best.
Right. But it meant the rest of the team couldn't get a timely stop, or the other receivers couldn't take any pressure off. It just shows that stark difference between individual brilliance and cohesive team success.
Speaking of monumental passing numbers, we have to go north to St. Louis. Their 32-24 win over Pittsburgh was another passing clinic. Tua Tagovailoa, passing player of the week. And for good reason. 445 yards and 4 touchdowns. The connection between Tua and his tight end, Sam Laporta, was just historic.
Laporta had a massive, 17 catches for 207 yards and a score.
17 catches for a tight end. That's not just a great game. That's practically a record volume. It shows Tua's complete trust and, probably a huge hole in Pittsburgh's middle field coverage that St. Louis just exploited over and over.
Precisely. And then Ladd McConkey just cleaned up with 3 touchdown grabs. St. Louis used that volume to surgically control the game. They held the ball for over 36 minutes.
And critically, converted 8 of 13 third downs.
Yeah. And even though Pittsburgh's Patrick Mahomes still threw for 272 and 2 TDs, St. Louis dictated the tempo. That ability to manage possession, it's a defensive weapon in itself.
All right, let's move on to the drama of the week. Let's talk about Atlanta surviving a tough Memphis team, 27-22. This game was all about one man being completely clutch, CeeDee Lamb.
Lamb was the definition of an MVP for Atlanta in that one. He was constantly making plays, 151 yards on 11 catches, and even punched in a rushing score. 3 total touchdowns.
And Atlanta, with Joe Burrow playing sharp, they needed every single one of those plays.
They did, because Memphis showed some serious resilience.
Their ground game was punishing. Josh Jacobs with 112 yards. They mounted that incredible 8-minute, 94-yard march in the third quarter that pulled them within 2 points.
The atmosphere must have been electric then. But that failed two-point conversion right after.
Yeah.
That was the psychological tipping point.
Yeah.
When you burn that much energy for one drive and you miss the chance to tie, it just kills your momentum.
That's exactly what happened.
Yep. The reports noted that Atlanta's defense just completely stiffened after that. They held Memphis to just 1 total yard across their final 2 possessions.
Defensive closing power. There's that theme again, even in a high-scoring game.
It shows up everywhere.
Which sets the stage for the biggest thriller of the week. Chicago edging out winless Detroit 37-34 in overtime.
Agony for Detroit.
Baker Mayfield had a huge game, 4 touchdowns, 375 yards, and he led that game-winning drive for Cameron Dicker's 48-yard field goal.
But look at Detroit's numbers. They racked up an unbelievable 510 total yards of offense.
Chase Brown was the rushing player of the week, 152 yards. Palmer had 208 receiving yards. And they had the ball for over 41 minutes.
41 minutes.
41 minutes of possession, and you still lose in overtime. That is just a fundamental failure. What did the analysis pinpoint as the fatal flaw?
The sources all highlight the struggle to translate that monumental yardage into touchdowns. Detroit was just 3 of 5 in the red zone.
And there it is.
That is the critical conversion rate separating the winners from the losers. When you settle for field goals inside the 20, you're just asking for trouble. That's the difference between Chicago being 3-1 and Detroit being 0-4.
Okay, let's head out west where the undefeated teams live. First, Las Vegas. They stay perfect at 4-0 with a 31-17 win over Denver.
Las Vegas is winning with a classic, reliable formula. They lean on the run game, 131 yards, and they get those clutch defensive swings.
And this game was absolutely defined by one of those swings.
Midway through the third quarter, Kirby Joseph grabs a 40-yard pick six.
And that one play took the score from a tight 21-17 game to a commanding 28-17 lead. That was the MVP moment right there.
That's the power of a defensive swing play. It's a 7-point injection plus a major psychological blow. They're winning with calculated offense and opportunistic defense. It's working.
And Arizona also stayed perfect, but they had a serious scare. They barely escaped Los Angeles 20-17.
Yeah, they did. The Rattlers outgained LA by almost 200 yards, but they struggled mightily in the red zone. 1 for 4. That's the danger zone where all that offensive prowess gets canceled out.
And this is where we see the immense value of a true dual-threat star like Bijan Robinson.
His value was off the charts. He racked up 216 total yards, 74 rushing, 142 receiving, and he generated a staggering 19 first downs for that offense.
That ability to just consistently move the chains is so huge, especially when red zone execution is failing. It was his tough, grinding yards on that final drive that set up the chip shot field goal for the win.
Exactly. He was the safety valve that prevented an absolute disaster. But we have to give credit to Los Angeles, too. They're an 0-4 team, but they're showing major fight.
For sure. Dak Prescott played turnover-free. Stephon Diggs was almost unstoppable. 11 catches, 164 yards, both of LA's touchdowns.
The analysis shows these winless teams are not going down quietly. They're close.
And the stakes are rising fast. Arizona now travels to San Diego next week for a battle of the unbeatens.
Yeah.
It is going to be a phenomenal test.
It is. But before we get totally ahead of ourselves, let's just quickly recap those official players of the week. The numbers are just staggering.
Right. Chase Brown of Detroit, rushing player of the week, 152 yards and a touchdown. Cooper Kupp, despite the loss, receiving player of the week, 14 catches, 213 yards, 2 TDs.
Just incredible. And Tua Tagovailoa, passing player of the week, 37 of 47 for 445 yards and 4 scores.
The divisional battles are now officially locked in.
They are. In the North, St. Louis travels to Chicago next Sunday. They're playing for sole possession of first place. That will be a decisive game.
And in the South,
Atlanta returns home to take on Birmingham, another key divisional matchup.
So if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, we've really identified the theme for those 0-4 teams. Detroit, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh.
They're all showing these huge flashes of offense.
Right. Pittsburgh had 445 passing yards and a loss. LA played a tight game. Detroit had 510 total yards. But they're all missing that critical conversion or that one defensive takeaway.
That inability to capitalize is what's truly separating the contenders from the rest. The champions are the ones who can turn great yardage into guaranteed points.
Or generate points when the offense stalls.
Red zone efficiency and turnover margin. That's the theme.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. This was the week that truly separated the contenders from the pretenders. We saw the dominance of defense in the East, while the North and South just turned into a festival of offense.
The separation is real. The unbeaten teams are finding ways to get those late game takeaways or those red zone scores, even if they struggle elsewhere.
So as we wrap up, we saw 4 teams stay undefeated, 3 teams remain winless, and you have these massive offensive outputs by players on the losing side. Cooper Kupp, Palmer, Chase Brown. I mean, guys putting up numbers that should win games. So here's the thought for you to chew on. What specific element, is it turnovers, red zone efficiency, or defensive pressure, is the most reliable predictor of success for these separating teams going into Week 5?
And which one is the hardest to fix on the fly?
A critical thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time. Week 4.
You've been listening to WFL Inside Access on the Replay Sports Channel, brought to you by Royal Retros. Be sure to like and subscribe to the Replay Sports Channel. Thanks for listening.